When I first started, I actually didn't know how cocoa was made.
What was the first thing that you put your attention?
I was like, it's all about the beans, it's all about the farmer, it's all about the post-harvest, and it's all about all of us. That's what makes cocoa and chocolate so interesting. But that's not where the consumer is. They don't care. What they want is easily consumable, not too much to think about, flavored chocolate. Pretty much everywhere in the world, nobody wants to grow stuff. The more that we can explain how food gets to our plate, the more we can add value to the unsung heroes of humanity, which are the farmers and the creators.
Let's get a few in the challenges.
Nobody tells you that. That's not fun.
So today we have one of the guests that we already normally, well, I was starting over because normally our episodes, we on the first hand find our guest and see our guest basically, mostly online. But this guest we actually already met in the beginning of this year on a fair. And before we dive into the story, what you are doing, I want to ask Nick, I know you as the one that is selling actually and is making very good chocolate. But how would you describe yourself?
How would I describe? That's a great question. I would describe myself as someone who really cares passionately about us, like people in general, in a world which increasingly doesn't. And I just want to be a good guy, despite the fact that like society makes it increasingly difficult for all of us to be our better selves. That's me.
Shake. That sounds super, like a good story, right? So, I mean, this whole idea of like being the good person for others, was that already always there, or is it like from the last years that with your work you want to do the best for other people?
So I was raised in a deeply religious home. As you can tell by the accent, I was born and raised in the UK, but Jamaican parents, and my parents both incredibly religious. They're part of Protestant religious group, which is very, very popular in Jamaica, called the Seventh-day Adventists. And I mean, if you look them up, you'll see that they sort of came out of a lot of the sort of religious sort of fervor which happened in the Americas in like the 19th century. But they arrived in Jamaica, and it's kind of like almost a mix between like Judaism and Christianity. It sounds weird, but really popular as a faith in Jamaica. And my parents just believed in doing right. You know, try and live a good life, try and not screw people over, and you'll go to heaven. You know, I mean, forget about the heaven bit. It's just a good way of kind of living your life, right? In general. And so they pass that on to me, and that's kind of what I try and do. In spite, as I said, of our better selves. You know, the whole capitalism thing kind of makes it a bit difficult, because it's like me, and then a bit more of me, and then a bit more of me, and then I have a really nice car and watch and a house and all of that sort of stuff. But in spite of all of that, you know, they made me want to make the world we live in be a better place. And that led me into journalism and, you know, eventually into chocolate.
I have to say that now you're mentioning this thing of doing good for the people, and now you're working in chocolate. You sound like a little like a Wonka yourself. I have to think. The last movie I saw of Wonka, there's one that was released like last year. It was Timothée Chalamet being like, "Yeah, I just want to make the people happy, and I wanted to do with chocolate." And that sounds exactly what you're doing, Nick. The real Wonka is you.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the thing is, right? There's a lot of flawed elements to that story, right? You know, I've not seen the Timothée Chalamet version, but like my reference point is the older movie and the older book, and there's a lot of really challenging moments in understatements within that whole book and within the film, and yeah, but you know, that's a good way of looking at the world, right? It's an imperfect world, right? And if you can put a little bit of light in there, that's no bad thing. That's no bad thing at all. And so that's what I have always done in whatever career I've been in. I've always been looking to try and find a way to help people. And chocolate's as good a way as any.
For some people, will be the best way, I believe.
I like that.
I want to ask, you said you were born and raised in the UK, but eventually you moved back to Jamaica. When did you decide to take that decision to coming back to Jamaica, or going to Jamaica for you?
Yeah. Okay. So I had been, my parents really pushed education on me very hard. They saw that as a way of getting away from some of the issues which existed in the UK, in terms of class, in terms of race, etc. And so they really pushed me to get an education. I ended up working at a TV company and then across at the BBC as a journalist. And that gave me the opportunity to pretty much travel the world, which is something I'd always wanted to do, getting paid to see the world. And the wonderful thing about journalism is you're actually paid to be a witness to history every day. Something which happens, every story is something which has never happened before, and you're paid to tell that story to the world. I found that incredible. It was like being a detective, being a historian, and getting to play with technology every day. But there are problems with it. But the benefit of it was it gave me a chance to be able to work in the US as a reporter for the BBC. I was a North American correspondent for BBC Radio for a short period of time. And then after that, I really got the foreign correspondent bug. Travel, the sort of having a grab bag and running and gunning and doing stories on the fly. I loved every second of that. And ended up in the Caribbean as a reporter. I did a wide variety of stories, from, incredibly heartbreaking stories about, hurricanes, earthquakes, to stories about agriculture and tourism. And there was a story about agriculture in particular and sustainable agriculture, which is what led me into becoming a chocolate maker over in Grenada. A story of Mott Green, the Grenada Chocolate Company, which is ostensibly probably the most famous sort of tree-to-bar brand which came out in the early days of craft chocolate. And weirdly enough, I never actually did the story on them. I did the pre-interview with the founder and ended up doing a story about beekeeping when I actually went to Grenada to do the story. I did something on sustainable tourism with Magdalena Fielden, who is now the head of the Grenada Chocolate Company and owns a Grenada Chocolate House. That's not right. So I did a story about the Grenada Chocolate Festival. Magdalena Fielden, who owns the sort of main sort of, I think it's called the Chocolate House in Grenada, which is on the Carenage. Beautiful. If anyone ever wants to go to the Caribbean, I have to say that Grenada is, and I will get into trouble by saying this, everybody, probably one of the most beautiful Caribbean islands. But the Carenage is like your traditional, multicolored, beautiful sort of gingerbread houses surrounded by this beautiful bay. And there's a little chocolate house there. And everything chocolate you can buy there, it is absolutely stunning. It's in a really beautiful historic part of the capital. Free advert there, Magdalena, but even so, it is very, very beautiful. And that inspired me to start looking into chocolate making. And the rest is history.
So that story started to make you, what specifically out of that? Like, is it now that you want to build that by yourself on Jamaica as well? Or what are the things that you would like to build now?
So when I came to Jamaica, I was always looking for a business. And if you look at the history of the Caribbean, people were very entrepreneurial. After slavery ended, people were looking for things to do. Many of them went into agriculture. My own family went into agriculture and into cocoa. So I didn't find that out until later. So I'd always been looking for something to do. and seeing what happened in Grenada with the Grenada Chocolate Company. When I spoke to Mott, when I did the pre-interview with him, I found out that a lot of the equipment which he used to start with Grenada Chocolate Company had actually come from Jamaica. And so that was actually the first time I realized that cacao even grew here, was him saying, well, I brought the equipment from you guys. I'm like, what? Really? And then talking to my mum, and she's like, oh, yeah, your Auntie Marilyn, she makes cocoa tea and she sells it in the community. And I'm like, what? Oh, yeah. And, actually, where you go to see your relatives? Yeah, Cocoa Ridge. Oh, yeah. That makes sense that they grew cocoa there, right? All of those things suddenly fell into place, and that's what really got me into the idea of doing something with cocoa. When I first started, I actually didn't know how cocoa was made. I didn't know how cocoa was produced. I knew nothing about the process. And actually, I wanted to use my journalistic skills to basically do a white label product, get somebody else to make the chocolate, and then I would sell it and sell the story. The more I got into the story, the more fascinated I was by the technology or lack of technology needed to be able to create an amazing product. And that has kind of been my route. It's been history and science and trying to perfect a better quality product, and then realizing that actually it's how you manipulate that product from the field, the tree, how you work with the farmer, how you do the post-harvest, how you then roast the beans, how you then process the beans, all of these individual steps, and everybody does it differently. And, there was once a period where I was like, it's all about the beans, it's all about the farmer, it's all about the post-harvest, and it's all about all of us. That's what makes cocoa and chocolate so interesting. It's how I personally decide. You may hear the sound of trucks. I apologize, but it is Jamaica. We're a very loud country. It's about how I roast. It's about how I refine. It's about how the farmer picks. It's about when they pick. It's about whether or not they pick on the same day. It's about whether or not they pick overnight because they have to go and pick up their kids. There's so many variables, but it all makes for a really interesting product, and it makes for a really interesting story. And I think we get really preoccupied in craft chocolate about the best, right? It's the best cocoa, which makes the best production, it isn't. You never see anybody wandering around saying, I make the best cakes in the world, right? We need to leave all of that behind and just say, with what we have in these individual islands, and we make the best that we individually can do. And that is a constant evolution, a constant move to being better and better and better. And hopefully there's going to be an appreciation which comes along. It isn't there yet. People don't value craft chocolate in the way that they do some other things. Like coffee.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's true. I think it can end up there, right? Andres and I experienced it on Chocoa, what kind of flavors and experiences and stories are behind specialty chocolate. Craft
we've
chocolate.
Got a long way to go, though, right? I feel that we've got a very and my fear is that many of the people who are here now won't be here in a few years' time, right? So people are laying down a bit like Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, right? Everybody forgets America Online and Yahoo and Hotmail, and everybody thinks it's all ChatGPT. There was a whole movement of people who got the internet going, who no longer exist, right? And they literally were decimated, and everybody was like, "Oh, you know what? Like, the internet is a flash in the pan, right?" Because it was at that point. It wasn't where it needed to be, and there is a possibility that where craft chocolate is now, it may contract to a point where there's hardly anybody, right? People will be messing about with it, and then it will come back in a different, maybe a better way. But maybe now it's
But what helps when you tell the story, how you build up certain things, right? And I think that story shows how that other people also can do it, and also it gives actually the additional element on why your chocolate is the best, because the story that it covers, that is also what can sell. And I want to ask you, Nick, like for you, when you already mentioned that the beginning, you didn't know anything from chocolate. And you even didn't know it was a part of in the family. But like, how were then the initial early days when you started creating your One Cacao?
That was terrible. It was, I mean, the chocolate was amazing. It was revolutionary. I remember the first time we like got beans and we like literally put them in a pestle and mortar and broke them up. And like, we had this rough paste and I was like, that tastes disgusting. And then we added sugar to it and I was like, oh, this tastes amazing. And then we put it in the fridge and it was like, this tastes absolute, but it was still terrible. Like the whole process around making it, from roasting the beans, gorgeous. Winnowing, when you separate the outer bit of the bean from the inner nib, like literally my nails would be bleeding trying to strip the individual beans. Nobody tells you that. That's not fun. And they tell you that you can use a hairdryer to separate the outer husk from the nib. Do you know how much mess that makes? I mean, that is like, for someone who doesn't like mess, that's a horrible thing. That's like, ugh, right? Nobody tells you those bits, right? Nobody tells you about when you overload your machine and chocolate splays everywhere, and nobody tells you that. Nobody tells you about when you learn to ferment and the ferment goes wrong and you're left with literally rotting cocoa beans which smell like dead fish. Nobody tells you those bits and pieces, right? But it's part of the journey. It's part of the process to get you better, and you learn and you learn and you learn. It's been really hard, but I have to say that the hardest bit is if you decide that you want to make chocolate your career, and scaling. Craft chocolate works very, very well at a very small level when you're selling to friends and family and, people within your local community, but you can't make a living from that. And it's very difficult to be able to change the world from that. And a lot of people use changing the world one bean, one bar at a time kind of mentality. It doesn't really work in that respect. You're impressing your friends and you're impressing your community, but it's not really, you're buying beans, especially if you're in Europe, from a centralized bean supplier. There's no real direct trade in the real sense of what direct trade should and could be. It doesn't do very much. It doesn't do very much at all.
I think this is the same a bit with coffee, because in coffee, I know that also there you have the specialty side, but that doesn't cover everything for the farmer, because it takes too much work, because there come extra steps with it that, just the big amount of coffee that is used for in the industry, that all skips a lot of steps, and that has all chemical processes that makes the process more rapid. And for specialty coffee, then you remove a lot of steps, but the time is longer, etc., etc. And I think it's the same for you in the specialty chocolate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many hoops to jump over to be able to create that direct trade, and you always see that.
There is a couple of things that you mentioned that I believe that are quite interesting. Starting by the thing of the best. And I believe it's interesting because it's true, we tend to try to sell like the best as the unique selling point of many products. It can be chocolate, it can be whatever. But maybe that's actually, as you were mentioning, the opposite. The craft chocolate does not have to be the best. It has to be authentic. Of course, then we can get into if that is better or not. For some people, that will be the best thing. Like they will associate the more authenticity to a better chocolate, and for some people, it will be another kind of flavor. But I really believe that for craft, maybe that's something that shall be really looked into. The fact that you're not selling the best chocolates, of the end, best, as I say, is something really complex to define. But you're selling something that is even better. That you're selling not the most processed, not the most really laboratory measured one by one to see if we can make the best flavor or whatever. No, you're selling the tradition, the old ways and the authenticity of creating something that now it maybe is much more industrialized. So I believe that there is something really beautiful that you're mentioning about craft, and something maybe that we could go a little deeper in is when you're talking about the first weeks, you said that everything is a chaos, but from a strategical point of view, I'm really interested when you were thinking about this. What was the first thing that you put your attention to? It was finding the cocoa beans, or you were already imagining how the marketing will look like? How was that for you?
So the first thing was, I mean, I was really lucky. The first beans that we ever had were amazing. They were amazing. So
Nice.
I just assumed that, that was what happened. Like all cocoa beans taste amazing. These came from like literally one of the best cocoa growing regions, not only in Jamaica, but possibly in the world, right? In terms of the flavor, parts of Jamaica for cocoa are a little bit like the Galapagos Islands. A lot of weird stuff ended up here because of colonialism, and that mixed together makes for some really interesting combinations. But when I went and got other cocoa beans, that's when I realized how bad cocoa can be if you get that wrong too. And so very quickly, I was all about the beans. And that's still, it's still been a very major part of what I do, because I think that you can make a very big connection with that relationship with farmers. So, my first connection with, the farmers was going over and collecting cocoa, not only from the community where those first beans came from, but also getting it from family and sort of collecting from the family property. Cocoa Ridge, I've described it to people in the past as being one of the most special moments of my life, because I was literally connecting with the land where my family had been on for hundreds and hundreds of years. They didn't go there of their own volition. They didn't go there, as immigrants. They were bought there as property, and to have worked hard enough to be able to eventually buy part of that land for themselves was huge. To be able to work hard enough to be able to pay for my mum generations later to be able to leave the island to go and have a better life is huge. And for me to be able to come back to that land and do something with it and make chocolate with it is super special. So yeah, the beans have always been really, really key to what I do. In terms of everything else, I think it was the realization that getting equipment was going to be very hard. We don't make any of that equipment here. We realized very early on that we needed to find a manufacturer. And it's really weird because there's a guy, for people who ever want to get into craft chocolate, there's a website by a guy called John Nancy called Chocolate Alchemy. And he is, almost like the godfather of craft chocolate. He's one of the guys who figured out how to hack this back in the, I guess, early 2000s. And he's still really a go-to guy for a lot of people. And I realized quite early on that there was equipment which he was recommending, which was cool. But like the second time I Googled equipment, I found like this company which was run by some Indian Americans, and they were using a black woman to do the demonstration of cocoa. And I was like, yeah, that's who I'm going with. Thank you very much. Representation means a lot, right? And especially when you look in the culinary world, you don't see many people my color doing stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna vote with my money, and I'm gonna support this Indian American owned person of color owned business in the States, and I've been with them ever since. I've bought their equipment, and I will continue to support them, even if there's other people who are makers or manufacturers of color. I've been with them from the early days, and relationships mean something for me. So
Wow.
I stick with them.
There are two beautiful stories which you now told, right? Like the last one that you just mentioned, where you like actually choosing your money for the precise people, and also going back to use the land of your parents. And I wonder in that sense, because you also mentioned like the importance of the beans, and what makes a bean then what is so important about the bean? What kind of characteristics do we have to look at?
I mean, this is where, like, going back to Andreas' point earlier on, where personal preference really comes in there. There are certain things which work for me, really work for me. And, you know, sometimes I'll see the awards and I'm like, yeah, that's okay. You know, and it's almost like I'm being brainwashed into thinking that that's the more desirable characteristic. I know what works for me. What works for me is I like chocolate which has almost a natural biscuity flavor to it. So it's almost as if you were to get digestive biscuits and dip them in chocolate. Like you know, like in the UK we had a thing called a McVitie's chocolate biscuit. Do you know the one I mean? Which it's got a chocolate covered on top of it. It's a particular brand.
Like a thicker one, a thicker piece of chocolate on the top,
that's
on a biscuit.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to love those. That's probably one of my early memories of chocolate. So when I taste chocolate, which has a very biscuity note to it, for me, that's heaven. You know, I really like dark chocolate, which has it's lacking in bitterness. I like a lot of stone fruit flavor coming in. I like acidity within my chocolate at the same time. If you combine those, that for me is a great cocoa. Not so big on like chocolatey chocolates, if that makes sense. You know, that's not my favorite flavor notes, but anything which has the aforementioned really works for me. I don't like flat chocolate. And I guess that's what I mean. Sometimes you'll taste chocolate, which is very flat. It doesn't have very much of a lingering
and deeper
note in when you taste it. It just tastes of chocolate. To me, that's very boring.
One really nice thing. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the one really nice thing about Jamaica that you mentioned to us, Nick, in Chocoa, is the fact that precisely there is cocoa for all sorts of tastes, no? Because in being a really small island in comparison to other countries that grow also cocoa, you can have different profiles of cocoa depending on where you grow it. Am I right? It was like that, the story that you told us?
Yeah. It's again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about like the islands, and it happens with quite a lot of the islands in the Caribbean. You know, if you think of like evolution and like how you can have a huge amount of different sort of endemic species from island to island, the same thing happened with cocoa. With the cocoa which arrived with the Taino, with the first indigenous peoples, the first people who populated the islands. And then on top of that, then you get the colonization bringing in different kinds of varietals. Then you have literally like the explorer class, as I like to call the English, coming in with like a bit of stuff from here and there and throwing it in, you know, oh, it's hot here. Let's plant something. You know, like that's kind of what happened with the Caribbean during colonialism. You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, let's plant it. And that happened with the cocoa, which was literally being picked up by explorers, by people coming from different parts of the world all the time for hundreds of years. So if you go, the Caribbean also, it's Jamaica, lots of different microclimates, lots of different soil types, lots of different varietals. It means that you don't have to go very far to get very different beans, you know, or different flavor characteristics coming out. You know, historically, we used to use the term Trinitario as a way of describing the beans which came out of this particular region because of the hybridization between like criollos and forasteros. We know it's much more complex than that now from science, but yeah, this was the test bed, and it happened for a lot of many centuries, you know.
And Nick, like, can you take us to the journey of your bean to bar concept? So what kind of steps do you take when you select your best beans? And I know like we tasted as Andres, we tasted different ones from different places. So then you took your bean, and what is then the next step along the way?
So I tend to start off with a very standardized process. I have a standardized roast profile, which I will do on a smaller machine to work out. And then from that, I get an idea of what that bean is saying. If it is super fruity, I will dial it way back down to see how much fruit I can get out of that without it starting to taste like a green bean. I'm using green bean. It's not like a green bean. It's not like coffee, but it's the same process as coffee, right? If you want it to be a lighter roast, I tend to be of the view that a light roast is a right roast, especially with coffee. I'm kind of a little bit the same when it comes to cocoa. I like keeping it light to bring out a lot more of the fruit. So that's kind of where I like to go in a chocolate. But sometimes that isn't necessarily the right way for the bean and my preference. So I'll do a light roast, dark roast. I'll mix roasts to see what it's like as a combination. And then from that, when we get to the right sort of level of roasting, the right level of blending, we'll then put it into production. And then once we've got a finished chocolate from that, we'll work out, well, is this chocolate going to work well as a single origin? Will it work well as a mixed chocolate in terms of a flavored chocolate? Do we want to add coconut milk into it? Do we want to add other regional ingredients into it to be able to use that as a base with our chocolate going forward? Increasingly now, I'm starting to look at using like a generic blend to go into our flavored chocolates. It just makes more sense economically to do that. And then keeping, you were mentioned earlier on about the sort of St. Catherine or the Portland and the individual areas, almost using smaller farms, making sure that I can put more money into these smaller farms to increase their production, and then sort of doing bigger mixed blends, because it's all about cost. Everything is about cost, right? If I'm doing a smaller batch from, let's say, 3 or 4 farmers, I may only be able to get, just work out the math, 200 kilos of beans, right? So 200 kilos of beans, you're going to lose a certain amount of that during the fermentation process, during the drying process. All of this is increasing the cost of your bean at the end of the day. When you've got to go through the labor of drying the beans, bagging the beans, driving backwards and forwards, all of these things are making for a really tasty chocolate bar, but that chocolate bar is going to end up costing you a lot more further down the line. So it's better to do that at a small scale.
In all this process, what would you say that is the most important part of the process in order to have a good quality?
I mean, everybody always says all of it, but it is all of it, right?
Yeah.
You can have, it's all of it. I mean, little things like moisture. You can ferment the beans perfectly as far as you're concerned. Dry the beans almost perfectly. It's 1% moisture-wise above where you need to be. So let's say it's 7.5% moisture. You go back to those beans in a month's time and it's covered in white mold. It may be savable still by going back into drying, but if you leave that, that's going to get onto the inside of a bean, and that is literally a waste of a quarter ton of beans. That's a lot of money. So drying, the fermentation, bad fermentation, you can never come back from bad fermentation. That's it. It's done, right? It's a terrible waste of beans. It's a terrible waste of time. There is literally nothing more devastating than putting a lot of time into beans, getting that first batch done, and it tastes like dirt. It's possibly the most soul destroying feeling that you've ever, because it's not like it was one day of work. This was literally 6 months in the growing of a fruit. It was 10 days in the drying and fermentation. It was another 3 months, let's say, in the waiting. And then it was another week in the production. And then it was maybe another couple of days to melt the chocolate down, mold it. It's devastating.
And how do you ensure then, like, if this is the most critical part, I guess that you have to put a lot of focus in the fact that at the end of this stage, everything went fine. So how can you ensure that the fermentation goes well?
You have to be there all the time.
Yeah.
And look, I am not a farmer. Make that very clear. And it used to really pain me when I would hear people talking about, how they work with their farmer partners to ensure that the fermentation is. They're not farmers either. Most people who are in craft chocolate were probably like software engineers at some stage before they got into making chocolate, right? And then all of a sudden they're like some sort of super agronomist. No, that's not how it works, right? You're not good at everything. Somebody who's been doing this for decades knows a lot more about fermenting beans than what I do, right? Now, at the same time, I can't be there all of the time. So there's a level of trust which goes into it. And truthfully, some people you can trust, some people you can't. Some people are good for the money and others aren't, and sometimes things will go wrong. Yeah, it's a really, like every element of humanity. There are people who do the right thing and there are people who do the wrong thing. There are people who take shortcuts and people who like their word is their bond and they will literally turn those beans every few hours for you, come rain or shine. They're going to come out of their house to do that. Not everybody will do.
And you only get to know that when you basically, get them towards to work with, or otherwise you don't know. You cannot trust words always. Yeah.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but people don't want to do this. Let's be realistic, right? Right? Agriculture sucks. Pretty much everywhere in the world, nobody wants to grow stuff. Like it's essential for like all humanity, but nobody wants to grow. Why do you think there's so much money? If you want to make money, come up with something which is related to fintech or agtech, right? That's all people care about, is making things happen easier and without having to pay people to do it.
I have to say, I think that yes, agriculture sucks in the sense that it's not that anybody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh yeah, I feel like using all my physical energy and being so many hours under the sun." I think that one of the problems why agriculture sucks is because it's not well paid or not. It's not paid what is deserved, because being in an office, completing Excels also sucks. But there's more people eager to do it because it's better paid. No,
absolutely, absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head. I was watching something the other day, and it was talking about how the only time we recalibrated the importance was during the pandemic, right? When we realized that our doctors, our nurses, the people who provide us with food and services, we could not live without them. And, we're applauding them every day. And it's great. Oh, you guys are putting your life on the line. And then all of a sudden, everybody wants a Batman Rolex, right? I mean, it's like the world's priorities go crazy. That, we need. Yeah, it makes no sense. What we value makes no sense.
Indeed. But I wanted to get back one moment to the process of creating chocolate, because you were mentioning before that you were looking into new blends, and we're really curious about how does that work? What is the process of deciding like the flavors? It has to do with what you have available, or you are looking a lot to trends in this sense? How are you working with it?
Yeah, I mean, moment of total honesty. Never a big fan of the whole flavored thing. I'm going to put that out there. You will see a lot more of those products from us, right? You guys met me. I'm all about the terroir. I'm all about the bean. That's where my heart lies, right? And about the sort of agricultural side of where you get to, and but that's not where the consumer is at all. They don't care. They don't care. What they want is, what they want is easily consumable, not too much to think about, flavored chocolate. And my mission is greater than just, it's all about the bean. It's all about the bean. I've got to think about my own survival. I've got to think about how I can keep people going and fund the stuff which I enjoy doing. And I can only do that by finding a way which works for my soul, which is combining a lot of our historical ingredients and a lot of our historical recipes into our food. For me, that's my sweet spot, and that's where I'm moving towards. So moving towards looking at how here in Jamaica, our national motto, I don't know why I did air quotes because it actually is our national motto, is out of many nations, one people, because we are a mix of African, but, I have Indian family, I have family of European descent, I have Lebanese family, I've got, we're Syrians, we're Chinese, we are Spanish, we are, everybody is part of the Jamaican story, right? We need to reflect that, and I think a way of being able to reflect that in the food is actually, for me, quite an interesting way. And being able to reflect that within chocolate is interesting. Like, prime example, like my partner is Catalan. And so churros are a really important part of, I love churros, right? Why aren't we doing more chocolate and churros? What Jamaicans traditionally have chocolate as a drinking chocolate. Why are we not doing a traditional Jamaican drinking chocolate with churros? That's a no-brainer. That is a no-brainer. If we historically do drinking chocolate, why aren't I doing drinking chocolate? Why am I only focusing on bars? If my Auntie Marilyn makes drinking chocolate for her pocket money, I need to be selling Auntie Marilyn's drinking chocolate, her cocoa balls, alongside my own products within our own shop front. That's what I need to be doing. We need to be bigging up that side of the culture. It's not taking away from the artistry and bean to bar and the tree to bar story, but it's just basically adding another element which is probably more accessible to the average person.
But you don't think, and it's, I guess that you will think that there's people that can be interested in the cocoa, in the more in the bean than in the chocolate. But for me, surprising in this sense, and I was commented at the beginning that the specialty chocolate market has not exploited as other specialty. I don't know. There's a lot of people looking into the grapes of the wine and what kind of grape, and we have to preserve this grape. And of course, there's much more people that just looks like, hey, I just want to have a nice wine than in the specific flavor that a grape gives. But I believe that there is still like a market to be exploited in there that tells the people, yeah, don't look only on the final flavor of the chocolate, or your chocolate can be more varied if you look into the cocoa bean. And then let's start talk about criollos. Let's talk about forastero chocolates, just as we talk about tempranillo, or we talk about X other wine. No, that is something that I believe that is interesting, that for some reason has not bloomed yet.
So there's a couple of things. Wine, the margins, and it's also done by, people. The processing is done by the people who own the grape to a large extent, right? So, and these are people with a little bit of capital to be able to do that, which isn't the case with cocoa, and it really hasn't often been the case with coffee either. But with coffee was able to expand because of Starbucks. Right, Starbucks paved the way for, lots of places in the world didn't have a real coffee culture. Spain, maybe, Italy, Holland. Historically, there was coffee shops. Even in the UK, there were coffee shops in the early days, right? And they were like the penny universities. It's true, people don't believe it, but like it was a key part of the culture for intellectuals, right? But that didn't exist globally. Starbucks is responsible for making that happen globally and getting people to have an interest not only in coffees coming in from that company, but also what was happening within their own countries as well. And that's catapulted a lot of really interesting movement within coffee globally. But if you look at most coffee, let's use coffee as a great example, okay? There's not many global coffee houses. Like it's very difficult to scale. People become like almost hyper local. So you'll find a roastery with maybe 5 at the most outlets, but you won't find them spread geographically around the UK or around Holland. If they do, they're mainly franchises, right? Chocolate doesn't lend itself to this at all. It doesn't lend itself for being exported very easily. It doesn't lend itself for scale. It falls at many, many levels. And so because of that, I think we're really going to struggle to be able to get to that level. I actually, right now, I can't see how that's possible because everything is against mass distribution of chocolate. If you're wholesaling, you're losing 50% of what you're selling from the get-go. Then you've got a distributor who's going to take, 10, 15%. What does that leave you with? It leaves you with very little. Plus, you've got competitors, like your big competitors. You are never going to get to a scale where you can even compete with them. I mean, I know it happened in the past with tech and things turn on, big companies in tech are no longer big companies in tech after 10 or 15 years. But with chocolate or confectionery, is One Cacao really going to unseat Mondelez? Are we going to take out the Hershey Corporation? Or Mars? I don't think so. I mean, it'd be great, but it's not likely, is it?
I get it completely, Nick, but also if you have asked any Roman back in the really old days, if the Roman Empire would ever fall, they would have told you that no way that happens. So, but the thing is that it's true that right now we cannot see how possibly that happens. I agree with you completely. I mean, maybe what I'm talking is Mondelez false, but in 100 years, and neither you or me maybe will be there to see it. So,
yeah, look, people buy into ethically sourced. Look, Tony's Chocolonely is a good example of a company which, some people will argue with that statement but like as an idea of a company which is able to be able to take an ethical linchpin and turn it into a way to be able to sell a huge amount of chocolate,
Mm-hmm.
But again, they fall down because it's difficult to be able to sell a huge amount of chocolate unless you go into other directions, which again link into the whole problems I was saying to you about distribution and supply and all of those sorts of things. The way that it's set up at the moment don't make it very difficult to be able to do that mass market.
But then, so let's get a few in the challenges. It's like, I know for sure you already mentioned this, the scalability. Why does it make such a big challenge in particular? And also we spoke about this, I think, already before, but for instance, one of the things that it also doesn't really help is the new deforestation law in the EU.
Yeah. I mean, it's odd, right? The EUDR is really difficult for people in the Caribbean to get their head round because we're increasing landmass. In terms of, we're actually planting more back now in places like Jamaica. We're going in the other direction. So to then suddenly have the EU saying to us, we want to make sure that your cocoa isn't being taken from, that's not the case. I mean, where cocoa grows generally isn't where people want to be living. It's up in the boonies, it's up in the far hillsides. But it's a law which we will have to try and figure a way to be able to get round. It's not straightforward, but we'll get there. But that's number one. I think number two, I'm going to have to go back to your question. I lost my place for a second. Sorry.
No, like what are like just the two biggest challenges that you're faced right now? So this is one.
Okay. So, and I guess the second biggest challenge that we face is, since we have issues with distribution, being able to get our chocolate into other markets, it means that we've got to totally maximize our local market. But when your local market has a GDP of around about 7,000 US, craft chocolate isn't their main priority. Like eating is their main priority. Making sure that they can get their kids to school is their main priority. Craft chocolate really is not, it's really nothing. So that's the challenge. The challenge is making sure that you can have a product which you can export, but you don't have to export in the traditional ways. So we have to be very creative about how we do that. And we are, we have a lot of visitors to our country. And they generally tend to have a little bit more money than the average local, it's fair to say.
So you attract tourism in that sense.
Yeah. But, at the end of the day also, and this is no disrespect to people who travel on holiday, sometimes they can be very cost sensitive too. And so, they've just spent thousands of dollars on a holiday, and many of them are used to all inclusive holidays, especially coming to the Caribbean. So the mere idea of dipping into their pockets is almost an affront. It's like, I've just paid $3,000 for my entire family to come here for 3 weeks. Why would I be paying an extra $5, $10 for a chocolate bar? At the same time. So it's a constant struggle.
I can't really relate with this because in November I went to a trip to Thailand, and it was really it's really typical in those places to bargain, no? That you want to buy something, but then when sometimes, of course, somebody offered me something, and people that I knew from there, they would tell me that this is too much. You can actually lower it to this price and stuff like that. And nobody likes to be fooled. So of course you want to get back a little and see if you can reduce a little bit the cost. But at the same time, I was thinking for myself, maybe it's not that bad that I'm fooled, in the sense that maybe for me this is like €3 more that I'm spending, and for this person means eating 2 days. So it's, that is a little bit what made me feel a little bit against the bargaining. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I don't want to pay more for something that is not worthy. But at the same time, shall I be that cost sensitive? It was something that really troubled my mind while I was traveling, and I understand what you are referring to. Like, okay, you already paid I don't know how much money to get into the Caribbean, and you're paying probably for things that you don't even need while you are there, with all these all inclusive. Is that bad that you spend something for this amount of money for something that is actually worth that amount of money?
And it's interesting. The cost of living in the Caribbean is not much. It's actually probably higher than it is in the States. So, because we're an island, so everything has to be imported in. So when you go to supermarkets, there's very little money left for even middle class to be able to live on, right? And then people are like, oh well, it's very expensive, and I would never pay that, or I would, things are expensive, but people don't see that, and the other side of that, Thailand is a very respectful society, and it's all cop and cap and all good,
yeah,
and
indeed.
Jamaicans are like, yeah, are you playing ball? Are you buying? You're not buying? Come on, I need to move on to the next person. And people find that, oh my God, it's the customer service levels are different, and you can't come in with more money than what these people are going to make in a year when you come on holiday. Or, you go to duty free and drop $6,000 on a Rolex, and then argue over a $10 chocolate bar. It's like, make up your mind.
Traveling privilege is something that I don't really like about tourists. so I cannot agree with you in that sense.
But we need the foreign exchange. And I think for chocolate, I think origin and consuming chocolate at origin is a really important thing. I think food is the one thing which unites us all. We all come from different backgrounds on this call, right? In terms of where we grew up, and but we know that food plays a really important role in all of our cultures. And it's the one thing which brings us together. It's the one thing which unites humanity is we all love eating. We may not like each other, but we all like eating, right?
No,
And we are
exactly.
all pretty much interested in, trying something tasty, you know?
Exactly.
Um, so like the more we can do to be able to unite around that, the better chance that we all have. Literally.
I always say like one of the things and reasons that I started this is so also because we see that food is now one of the factors that is leading to a more polarized world, which actually should not be the case, as what you said. Like food always brought people together, and in the end, it's something that we all rely to. We have all different memories around food and dishes, and man, and the experience that we get from it. And we talk about like quite hard challenges, Nick, but over the years, you can also be very proud on what you built, right? And I can imagine that you have certain moments that are highlights for this. So over the years, what made you very proud of what you achieved for maybe the people around you? Because in the end, what you want, the work with what you do, you want to do that for the others. But
Yeah, I know exactly what that is. There's two moments. Number one was we literally got some beans which were donated to us by one of the farmer groups because they were too small for export, and they were like going to throw them out, and we were like, we'll take those beans, and they were like, yeah, just take them. So we took them and we processed them, and Marta and I were like, this chocolate tastes absolutely. She's opposite me now, which is why I'm looking across. This chocolate is absolutely amazing. It was, what I was saying earlier on about like that really lovely bright acidity. It just literally exploded in your mouth when you tasted this chocolate, and we were like, okay. So we were like, just for the sake of it, let's put it into competition. So we put in 3 bars. One used that sort of Jamaican style chocolate cocoa, a hot drinking chocolate style recipe with the cinnamon and nutmeg. They had no idea. They didn't know what to make of that, right? As a chocolate bar. I think we'll try it again now, I think, right? And we put in 2 bars of the unworkable chocolate, the unexportable cocoa. They both won at the Academy of Chocolate a silver and a bronze. This was like 6 months, 7 months into us making chocolate. And we were like, okay, maybe we're heading in the right direction. That was number one. Number two was when my father, God rest his soul, and he was always a massive supporter of what we were trying to do here with chocolate. And literally, it was either go to the Northwest Chocolate Festival, or pay our rent, one or the other. And I was like, I really want to go. And he was like, don't worry, I'll pay for your fare to go. And it was an incredible experience. And I will always like be so thankful for my parents, for Marta, my partner, for all the support they've given me to be able to do what I do. Because this has made me truly happy. I am very, I get happy making chocolate.
yeah,
Even the bits which I found really painful, like winnowing. Earlier on, I mentioned that I hate winnowing, but like we just bought a new attachment for our winnower, and it's just like this is so good. Like the thing which I hated the most is now like and it's done. That's great. That's great.
yeah, very nice.
Yeah,
Proud.
it
I
it
mean,
is
this is beautiful, right?
it
Yeah.
is so fascinating to hear you talk about your journey. And yeah, we're really lucky that you can be here to do so. But we want to hear this journey does not end here. What comes in the future? What do you expect that will, how One Cacao will
I
grow?
think for us, the thing which we've realized is you can't separate until we get to a stage where craft chocolate is so ubiquitous and people are willing to pay the money for it. And for us, the history and the process and how chocolate is transformed is key to everything. There is a great mystery behind our foods in general. And I think the people who work in the restaurants and all of these people, we would be dead without, right? But the reason we don't value it is because we don't know what it takes to be able to get it from source to our plate. You know, butchers, I'm sorry if anyone's vegan, but like, trust me, meat for me is really important, right? But how meat goes from being Barbar, black sheep, to how it goes to being a nice lamb shank is a whole world, right? And nobody knows about that. Nobody knows about that. And I think that's really interesting. I genuinely think, and actually, for some people, it probably would turn them into vegans to know how it gets transformed, right? It more than likely would do. But unless people know that story, you're never going to value it.
Yeah. And it's something we do at this podcast. We share the stories of the ones that work
exactly.
with the better. Small or big, we don't mind. But actually, I love the stories of the smaller ones always a lot, because it's filled with passion, it's filled with all kind of things, and also the challenges are completely different opportunities.
Absolutely.
Nick,
there's a story. Am I breaking up? I apologize. I was going to say there's a story of Geordie Rocker from the name of the restaurant, Can Rocker in
Rocker, exactly.
Yeah, and like all I remember is it's got sheep in there, right? But it's a story about how he works with like Geordie works with like this really tiny little sheep herder to be able to get this incredible like product, and I was just like, I love that support. I love the idea of like, you know, this one of the world's best restaurants supporting some random sheep farmer on some random hill in northern Spain. Like, that's cool. That's cool. That's the relationship that I like. I like the support that can, I love all of that. So the more of that can happen, the better it is.
That is beautiful. You know what? I will add one story to this, because Nick, I have your chocolate still here, because we kept it like when we reached so many followers, so many listeners, we were like saying, this chocolate, we're gonna do that as the celebrating that moment, you know? Because it had the story, it had the flavor, the experience.
It was my favorite chocolate out of the
exactly.
Oh, wow. Thank you, guys.
So we kept it till that moment. And I still have it because, I enjoy it.
I don't have it anymore. I think that's even better.
Yeah, exactly. The consumption is good as well, right?
I'm almost there. I need new.
Oh, man. Honestly, I've really enjoyed being on with you guys today, and it's been so much fun. And I really hope I get to see you in Chicoa next year. But otherwise, you know, like, as I said, for us, we've got to figure out a way to be able to get our product to the people, and maybe it's more local. Maybe our future isn't necessarily being able to get our chocolate to you in Europe, but being able to figure a way to be able to get it, or if we do, in a more sustainable way, right?
Yeah.
You know, you guys are in a port. We're going to be in a port very soon. You asked about the future of One Cacao. There's a way that direct trade can mean that we'll be able to sell chocolate directly to you very, very soon. So you asked about the future of One Cacao. There's a little hint to it there. So keep your eyes and ears peeled, okay?
We keep it. There's only one thing, two things that we end this podcast with, is that we give the guest the opportunity to ask a question to us, because we fired with 2 questions to you. So it's your turn, Nick.
I guess the question I would have for you guys, name of the podcast, Tomorrow Bites, right? What are your hopes in terms of the future of food, number one, and what impact the podcast will have on the wider society?
Want to start, Shako, or I go?
If you already have it ready, I mean, for what we will bring, what I hope is that, like, Tomorrow's Bites means basically the name says the bites of tomorrow need to be better in around health, sustainability, ethical things, you name it. The food system in general is like, it's quite broken, and we need to take the pieces again and restore it. And on certain elements, it's already starting. And I know that, like, right now, the biggest voice that is putting out about the industry is that it is bad. But I know that there's people working towards a better future. So that is what we'd like to bring and share to others. So where I would like to become in the end, the podcast is just the place where we get to the end, like get those stories to learn from it, because then we can grow ourselves and also be inspired. And maybe we are, in that sense, the voice of the movement.
Yeah. I believe that where I would like the food system to grow to is a moment where we can we reconnect with food in a way that I think it's been lost in the last 100 years with a little bit more with revolutions and with most industrialization, that it's really focused on production, but we have in some way lost the perspective of actually what we are eating and we're putting in our plate. So actually, I already did a video talking that I think it's important that people starts to cook again. I think that it's important that we value the chain and that we give the proper value to agriculture, because in the end, that is the most basic aspect of the food system, and we need to in some way help them to grow and not to lose something that is really important. That doesn't mean that I am neglecting innovation. I believe innovation is a big part of this as well. And that is why I want to listen from both sides. And I expect that the impact that this podcast has in a short term is promoting these conversations and making people interested in the food system in many aspects that are not only their own niche, and that they are open to listen to other opinions and see that everybody wants to do good in their own way, and they can choose which things are valuable for them. And in the long term, I hope that Tomorrow's Bites does not only focus on industry, and that we can also have an impact on society as that. But then that will come in future.
You know, one thing which I really want to start looking at is food waste, because I'm really I'm more than concerned about how, you know, we live in a tourism reliant society, and I know that there's a huge amount of food waste, and I'm really concerned about how we deal with that in a better way. You know, I've not even contemplated it properly yet, but I know that there's something which can be done, because I think people talk about food waste in a very sort of greenwashy sort of way.
Yeah.
But I don't think they think about it in terms of how we can better use the food which comes into our hotels, and how we can, like, I went to the Basque Culinary Centre a few months ago, and it was amazing because I'd not really heard of this, like, you know, total use of food, like not getting rid of food scraps to be able to turn it into fit. And I was like blown away, and I was like, ultimately that's what my parents did. But like, it's interesting hearing about how restaurants are utilizing it, and I think if we can figure a way to be able to utilize everything in food, like, that can be so revolutionary. And it's just kind of worrying that I'm only just starting to think about it now.
We just had a conversation with a chef on. He says, like, it's just that mindset change. Is that if you have a carrot, like, lots of people throw the green part away, but why are we actually thrown away? Like, nature didn't make it like that.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
then we talk deeper into those things. Yeah.
That's, for me, that's like, I want to think about more about how we use everything within our chocolate making. How, you know, we were thinking the other day about how you make the cocoa tea. Remember I was saying that I want to lean more into that sort of historical side of things. And when you make a really nice cocoa tea, you would always use like the desiccated coconut to make the coconut milk, a little bit of water, and then you're left with all of this sort of cocoa, which, you know, you could use a coconut again in other things, you know, in gazada or some other kind of Jamaican traditional dishes. It's like a pastry, which we would have like desiccated coconut too. But I was thinking about dehydrating that again and then using that within like our coconut milk chocolate. There's more ways to be able to use the byproducts, and yeah, that gets me excited.
Yeah, I think it has to do, as I said before, in reconnecting with food and give the value that it has. Now, seems that when you throw something, you're like taking the value of it, and if you value it, then you will do the most for not. So I think that is part of the progress. One other thing that we do at the end of the podcast, this is the very last question that we will do, Nick. Actually, some people find it the hardest question that we can do. What is your favorite dish or food?
Oh, that's easy. It's very easy. So in Derby, which is where I grew up, there's a thing called Bakewell tarts. Now, Bakewell tarts, I should really call Marta in for this, right? But Bakewell tarts is a little bit like, Marta, there's a dish in Catalan in Spain, which Bakewell tart apparently tastes like, or I said it tastes similar. Okay. So Bakewell tart is a regional dish from where I'm from in Derbyshire, where I grew up. And it's very similar, funnily enough, to a dish which comes out of Galicia, the almond tart which comes out of Galicia.
Santiago's cake.
Yes, it tastes almost exactly the same, right?
That is great.
This is coming out of the UK. This is coming out of the UK, which is not known for any kind of historical, amazing tart de Santiago. Yeah.
Santiago's cake, yeah.
Right?
Samji's cake, yeah.
It tastes so good. It tastes so good, and it reminds me of childhood. Unfortunately, when I first went to the UK with Marta, I introduced her to the commercial one, which tastes like crap, right? And so she was like, I was like, this is one of my favorite dishes. And she tried it. She's like, yeah, this tastes like crap. And I'm like, yeah, it tastes like crap. Because, again, like we're saying, we have got so used to the commercialization of these products, right? And it has a vague similarity, but it's not the same as a Bakewell tart. And that's what is my favorite dish. It reminds me of childhood. It reminds me of my favorite days at school because, it wasn't part of my culture. It wasn't part of West Indian culture, but it was part of something which we would have on almost like high days at school. And it was like the highlight of my month when we would get Bakewell tart. And it's one of those things which is so rare to get done properly that when you get it, it just makes you so happy. It really does.
Sounds great. And actually, if it tastes like anything like Santiago's cake, I know that it's already really good.
It's so good. But you literally have to go to the right shop. I didn't realize that even only I think the last but one time I went back for like a reunion, if you can imagine, with like a load of mates, and we went mountain biking in the Peak District. And so we ended up like literally at the place for getting Bakewell tart in Bakewell. And we ordered it, and we've been cycling. And people like sweet treats after cycling.
I do.
I think we demolished a whole one each. It's like literally like a whole face full of like tarts. It was great. It was great.
Well, then Nick, we cannot add anything to this conversation. It's been really great that you shared the whole story already from the first day until all the challenges that you faced and going through every single step. I think you left really good things that people can think about, as I already commented. And I don't know, I believe that it was a really fruitful conversation. I'm really happy that you came to the podcast to share your story.
Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate being on and continue the good work,
Thanks.
Thanks.